Hey everybody. So I wanted to talk to you today about Act 5, Scene 1. So Act 5 only has two scenes in it, and it is the resolution. If you remember our notes when we were talking about the structure of a five-act play, the final act is the resolution where all of the different conflicts and issues and plot lines kind of coalesce, they kind of meld together, and as a result, we have the ending. We have all of these different plot lines wrap up as they collide with one another. So, um, I also talked before about how whenever Shakespeare does something tragic, like in the previous scene, we saw the death of Ophelia, or actually, we heard about the death of Ophelia. Well, whenever Shakespeare does something tragic, he follows it up immediately with something funny. And this is to lighten the mood so as not to overly depress his audience. And this scene is no different. So, Act 5, Scene 1 is on the heels of the news of Ophelia's death. And in this act, we start out with a couple of gravediggers for all intents and purposes. And these gravediggers are having a conversation about uh, Christian burial and suicide, and they're discussing the commotion that Ophelia's death has caused. See, here's the problem. Ophelia's death uh, led to a lot of speculation. There are some that believe that she died accidentally, that when she fell into the water, that she tried to swim to shore and just couldn't make it and just drowned. And then there are those that believe, based on the news of how she died, that she allowed herself to die, that she suicided. This is a big contention for these people at this time because if she suicided, that's a sin. Her soul is damned, and she voids the right to a Christian burial, to last rites, if you will. She voids the right to have a priest come and basically pray over her. It's the difference between having a fancy funeral where people go and weep and a priest says some pretty words versus basically just dumping her body in a ditch. And so those that believe that she committed suicide believe that she just deserves to be buried in a ditch somewhere. And those that believe that her death was accidental, given the nature of her mental state, they believe that she is fully entitled to this Christian burial. Well, Claudius agrees with that, and he is giving her a Christian burial. And this upsets a pretty significant portion of the people. Anyway, all of that to say that these two gravediggers are talking about this, and they're throwing in some jokes, and you notice that one of the gravediggers is taking things very, very literally. Just having a bit of funny sounds. He kind of reminds me of. I use the example of Drax from uh, Guardians of the Galaxy. So if you kind of picture that, this is the way this gravedigger is reacting to everything, and it's kind of funny. But be that as it may, as they're talking, Hamlet and Horatio arrive, and Hamlet starts to talk to them, just idly making chit chat. And he encounters this very Drax-like behavior from this gravedigger, and he's getting a kick out of it. You know, he's having a good time. You know, others would be annoyed by it, but he's actually enjoying himself. Which is weird when you consider that the last thing we heard from Hamlet was him basically saying that from this time on, his thoughts be bloody or be nothing worth. In other words, I don't care about anything except getting my revenge against Claudius, which is what I thought his whole goal was. So if that's his goal, why is he wasting time shooting the breeze with these gravediggers? I wonder if we can trust him at this new promise, or if this is just more talk like we've seen from Hamlet this entire play, where he talks the talk, but never really quite walks the walk. So, that being said, as they're talking, the gravedigger is digging up some old bones, some old decayed bodies. basically making room for fresh bodies. I don't know if you know that or not, but um, oftentimes, especially back in the day, graves were recycled. You would let a body rot in the ground for X amount of time, and when it was sufficiently decomposed, you either buried another body on top of it, or you dug that one up, burned the rest, disposed of the rest, and put the new fresh body in the grave. This saved on space, especially certain countries that are smaller or island countries. They don't have a lot of space for graves. So, you got to recycle. So that's what these grave diggers are doing. And so this grave digger pulls up some bones and he pulls up a skull. And Hamlet's like, "Who you got there?" And he tosses the skull to Hamlet, and Hamlet's holding it and he's looking at it. And the gravedigger's like, "Oh, this was Yorick, the king's jester." Now remember, Hamlet's the prince. So he was very familiar with Yorick. He was like, "Oh my god, this is Yorick? I knew this guy. He was practically my babysitter." And he starts kind of waxing philosophical about the whole thing. And if you ever see pictures or paintings or anything like that of Hamlet, they're always pictures of him holding up a skull. Well, that basically gives the thematic idea that Hamlet, the play of Hamlet, is all about death, which it is, but it's also reminiscent of a specific scene, this scene right here. Hamlet is holding the skull of his former court jester. He's like, "Oh, poor Yorick, I knew you well." And he gets to talking and reminiscing about it. And he starts to think about life and death again, kind of a running theme with him. And he gets to thinking about how it doesn't matter how good or bad, rich or poor a life that we led, we all end up worm food in the end. It doesn't matter how noble we were, how corrupt we were. It doesn't matter what we did in our lives. We're all worm food. And so he's looking at this court jester and he's like, "You were the funny guy. You were the guy that made everybody laugh. Look at you now. You're just like every other body in this graveyard." And so, as he's thinking about this, he hears a commotion off in the distance. And he looks and he sees that there is a funeral procession, a group of people in a funeral line heading to their very spot. And he realizes this grave that this grave digger was digging up is for whoever is arriving. Now, we know this is a bit of dramatic irony. We, the audience, know or can guess, based on recent events, that this is probably Ophelia's funeral, and it is. Hamlet, remember, he just got back into town. He has no idea that his murder of Polonius led to his ex-girlfriend's death. So he sees that it's the royal court. He sees there's Laertes, there's Claudius, there's Gertrude, there's the whole royal court. He's not ready to reveal himself yet, especially to Claudius. So he runs and hides, and he's content to just kind of listen and watch. As he's watching, he realizes that it's Ophelia's grave. It's Ophelia's funeral. And Hamlet is like, "Oh my God." And as he watches, Laertes, in an act of sudden impetuousness, jumps into the shallow grave, cradles his dead sister in his arms, and says, "Bury me with her. I don't want to live anymore. If I can't live without my father and my sister, what's the point? Just kill me." And so you kind of see there's a parallel going between Hamlet and Laertes. Laertes is a foil for Hamlet. And if you remember from your notes, a foil is a character who exists in a story to bring out certain characteristics of a major character. So Laertes exists in this story to be kind of a mirror image of Hamlet, but to have certain qualities that he possesses that Hamlet should possess or doesn't possess for whatever reason. And the main quality here is his sudden, um, impetuous nature, the idea that he acts before he thinks. Hamlet has been dragging his feet for months in his plot for revenge. And every time he feels a little bit emotional, he starts going into this whole pity party, woe is me, why don't I feel the way that others feel, blah, blah, blah. And Laertes is doing all those things that Hamlet feels like he should be doing. Laertes dropped everything, left college, came back home, immediately sought revenge in the last act. Laertes listens to reason and understands who to listen to and who not to listen to. Laertes takes action against those that have wronged him, immediate action. When there's sorrow to be shown, Laertes immediately shows it. And all of this realization kind of hits Hamlet like a truck. And he's overcome with emotion himself. And he leaves his hiding spot and he jumps into the grave right there with Laertes. Claudius is shocked. Gertrude is shocked. The court is all like, oh my God. Laertes is shocked at first, but then the rage takes over and he's like, you. And he lunges at Hamlet. And the two of them quite literally fight each other in the grave over top of Ophelia's dead body. Okay, the court attendees have to literally pull them out of the grave and pull them apart from one another. And they kind of get into a pissing contest. Laertes is like, I loved my sister. And Hamlet's like, I loved her more. And Hamlet confesses his love for Ophelia here. He truly loved her. So that whole part when he was talking to her the last time he talked to her, and he told her he didn't love her, that was all a ruse for Claudius and Polonius. He truly did love her, and it makes her death even all that much more tragic. So they have to be separated apart. Claudius pulls Laertes to the side, and he's like, dude, now's not the time. Stick to the plan, right? Because remember, in the last act, they had devised a plan to get rid of Hamlet. So, anyway, and so that pretty much ends Scene 1. This iconic scene is the first time, I think, in the entire play where we have all the major characters, whether they're alive or dead, all the major characters in one place at one time, except for Polonius. But all of them, although I guess you could make the argument that Polonius is probably in this graveyard somewhere. Anyway, the point is that they're all in one place at one time. The fact that it's a graveyard as the setting for the first time that they're together is both foreshadowing of tragic things yet to come and also thematically fitting. Because this whole play is about death. I mean, Hamlet's been talking about death his entire play. And now that the bodies are starting to pile up, it's pretty fitting that we have an iconic scene taking place in a graveyard. Makes sense, right? This is also a great scene to do a bit of a character study on Hamlet, for those of you that are doing the character study prompt. At the beginning of this scene, we're given a glimpse back into pre-Hamlet Sr. death, Hamlet Jr. What I mean by that is we're given a glimpse of how Hamlet used to be before all of this tragedy fell upon him. He's carefree, he's laughing, he's joking, he's having a great time with Horatio and these gravediggers. He's reminiscing about Yorick. And then, once the other characters get here, we're reminded of where Hamlet is now, where he's impetuous, he's acts before he thinks, he's impulsive, he's dangerous, he's unstable, he's almost bipolar at this point. And you can make the argument that he's legitimately mentally unhinged. I mean, who jumps into a grave? I mean, who has a pissing contest in the middle of a funeral? No, I loved her more, right? I mean, like, who does that? So we see just how far Hamlet has fallen, and it makes this whole thing that much more tragic. So, um, it's a somber reminder of just how much this whole thing has affected him. So, that's scene one.